people are getting pretty hot and bothered because Dick Cheney has claimed that he's not part of the executive branch. This comes as an enormous surprise to Congress and others. I'm not entirely sure I see why. I mean, I'm not even convinced that Dick Cheney is an earthling. Still, seriously now, the fact that he claims not to be a member of the executive branch is pretty startling to any reader of the Constitution, because Article 2 makes it plain as day that the Vice President is indeed a part of the executive branch. And this example of maniacal overreaching by the Vice President has finally moved a lot of people to recommend that he be impeached. People on the right have been calling now for his impeachment. Constitutional scholar Bruce Fein, who was an ardent opponent of Bill Clinton's back during the Monica Lewinsky scandal, he's now come out and said he thinks Cheney should be impeached. I'm all for that. I think that Cheney should be impeached as soon as possible, and I think a whole lot of other people in this government should be impeached. But I'd like to make a suggestion. It may strike some as radical, but I think that instead of waiting to the bitter tail end of a presidency like this to start scrutinizing what the Constitution says, maybe we should be reading it all along. Maybe we should be using it to determine if a candidate or a ticket is acceptable in the first place. For example, the 12th Amendment to our Constitution makes abundantly clear that both members of a ticket, of a presidential ticket, have to come from two different states. You can't have a president and vice president or candidates for those offices coming from the same state. And the fact is that Dick Cheney, according to the 12th Amendment, should not have been included on the Republican Party ticket because he, like Bush, was a Texas resident. He paid his taxes there. He was registered to vote there. He registered his car there. He had his primary residence there in a $1.6 million mansion in the Houston suburb of Highland Park. I mean, that's where he had to live in order to run Halliburton. Now, because of this requirement, this bagatelle in the Constitution, 3 days before Cheney decided that he would become vice president, instead of just picking the vice president, 3 days before he did this, he hurried up to Wyoming, where he was born, and he registered to vote there. Now, a faculty member at the law school at the University of Texas said that this was a transparent attempt to get around a constitutional requirement. That's what Cheney did. And there was not a ripple about this in the media. Nothing, unless you count the website tom+paine.com, which did an expose of this constitutional infraction, and the student newspaper at the University of Texas. Otherwise, I don't believe there was any coverage of the fact that Cheney was on the ticket illegitimately. Now it gets better. On that $1.6 million mansion, he got himself a real estate exemption of some $350,000. You can only get that exemption, according to Texas law, if the home in question is your primary residence. Well, Cheney was, in fact, sued by other Texans because he got that exemption, even though he was now officially a Wyoming resident. The judge in the case, a Reagan appointee, ruled that Cheney could keep the money. And why was he a Wyoming resident? What about all the evidence that he was a Texan? Well, the judge said Cheney said he was a Wyoming resident, so he must be. So he got to have his cake and eat it too. Now, you know, somebody maybe should look into the possibility that he committed voter fraud by registering in Wyoming. But at the very least, we should look back and maybe learn something from this episode. This was a patent attempt to skirt a constitutional requirement. The whole ticket was unconstitutional. And then this team went on to run a regime that's more unconstitutional than any in our history. I mean, they've never even been elected. But before we, continue to marvel at how outrageous this regime is, we should note that early signs of trouble have often gone unnoticed or unreported because it would seem sort of uncool to make an issue out of something that really points to disasters down the road.